He is blind to the fact that by comparison to America, we are universally in the world regarded as the home of tolerance and peacefulness. Why? Not because we're without racial prejudice or without problems of discrimination. Of course we still have those problems. But what he's done is simply to emphasize statements by people who are ensconced in the battle against racial discrimination and has failed to notice the obvious, that Canada, by comparison to America, is heaven on earth from a racial point of view. Heaven on earth. We live well and peacefully. And the testament of all the other nations when they're polled and asked whether there is racial tolerance in Canada or whether there is in America, the lie is put by the third parties. It's clear that America loses. She's at the bottom of the list of nations that are respected for their racial tolerance, whereas Canada is near the top. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor March. Mr. Taylor, 5 minutes for closing arguments.
Yes. This will be my last opportunity to address you, so I will take this opportunity to point out that Professor March still has not given us a single advantage of racial diversity. He's told us over and over how wonderful it would be if racial diversity could be made to work. How lovely it would be if we could all love each other and live together peacefully. He's said this I don't know how many times, but it hasn't happened. It simply hasn't happened. He also says human nature can be changed. Well, that reminds me of an attempt made to change human nature that dates back to the early part of the 20th century. Communism. Communism was based on a very appealing idea, the idea that somehow human nature could be changed, that selfishness could be overcome, that people really could be taught to live from each according to his ability to each according to his need. This was a very appealing idea, almost as appealing perhaps as the notion that race could be made not to matter. The Soviet Union staggered on under this idea for 70 years. Many other nations attempted it. Why did communism fail? Why did this noble view of human nature fall asunder? Because it was a misreading of human nature. We now understand that there is a certain basic selfishness in human beings that it is folly to attempt to overcome. We must harness that selfishness by means of the free market, and that makes a better and more successful society, not this happy notion that somehow selfishness can be made to go away. It doesn't work. It didn't work. And likewise, it is not going to work, this idea that race can be made to go away. I would point out again, Professor March has not given me a single example of a country where racial diversity is providing a strength. He has said Canada is heaven on earth for racial diversity. Well, I'd like to ask Wade McKell that. That's the man in Toronto School Board who says integration has so failed black students in Toronto that he wants segregated schools. Is Canada really heaven on earth for him? The idea, somehow, that we can build a society based on an illusion and good intentions, it is appealing. I used to think that way myself. And I resisted for years giving up that illusion. I wanted to be an optimist and an idealist too. But we have to be realistic. Professor March says there's no such thing as human nature. Well, look at history. Look at every society. One example that I would give is this. I love my children more than I love the children of anyone else in the world. And I make no apologies for that. There have been attempts to raise children communally, in communes, and say, no, that's selfishness, that's wrong. You can't care more for your children than my children. Didn't work. People care for their own children more than they care for the children of others. It's human nature. Furthermore, I would make an analogy a little bit further. I don't love my children more than I love the children of others because they're objectively superior. I love them because they're mine. That's all it takes. And it doesn't mean that I dislike your children. In fact, I can work up quite an affection, perhaps, for your children. I feel no hostility for your children. but my children come first because they are mine. Now, a race is a person's extended family. It is the largest group to which human beings feel a kind of natural, instinctive loyalty. It is their large, large family. And they have a loyalty to their race that is like my love for my children. It is one that puts a certain group first without the slightest hostility to any other group. And if whites have set aside this natural loyalty, if they have given up this healthy notion of who they are and liking who they are, if they let their societies drift out of their control, then they will find themselves minorities in their own country. Will that be a good thing? What if there's only a 15% chance that a population third world Canada will be like the third world? What if there's just a 10% chance? What if there's just a 1% chance that I'm right? Don't you think that possibility should be prevented? Canada and the United States do not owe their countries to the rest of the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Peter March, you have.
I think the example of the family is a very useful one. Jared says it is natural for us to love our own children more than the children of others. But you see, the fallacy in that argument is glaring. In lots of families, a child is adopted. In many families in Canada, the adopted child is of a different race from the original family. And if we take what he says seriously, that child becomes my child, and we prefer it, despite the fact that it's of mixed race, perhaps, or of a race different from that of the parents, and nevertheless there is a bond, and that person becomes the favorite, my favorite. So if Jared had thought for a moment about this example, he would have immediately seen that the example of adoption shows that he's entirely wrong, even on the general argument of race. People can join my social group and be as welcome as anyone was in my social group of the same color. It's not even true that the social group of which I am a member of is unicolor. At the moment, it's already diverse, and that's again a mistake that Jared is making. We have diverse societies already in place. We have to learn to live in peace and productively together in that demand. Canada is the perfect example, the best example we have at the moment of a diverse society. If you had asked the French, the English, the Germans in the 19th century, every one of them would have told you that there were deep differences between French, German, and English, that they are a different species. The Germans were the monsters, the French were the dissolute sexual ones, and the Brits were the toffee-nosed empire builders, the violent ones. Rule Britannia. They would have spoken in exactly the same terms. Oh, the Brits will never live with the Germans. Never the Germans with the French. Never the French with the Spanish. Until, of course, the EU happens. And suddenly these people who saw each other as races, absolutely as much as Jared sees a difference between blacks. I can tell you the 19th century Englishman thought that the 19th century German was a monster or a genius, paradoxically. And this is Canada with all those people living in it. All of those people came here and they lived together, and the only record of the difference now, a few names down the South Shore. We have succeeded in full integration of peoples who saw themselves as hopelessly, profoundly, irremediably different. Jared wants to know an example of a racially diverse, successful society. Open your eyes, buddy, start at Nova Scotia, and keep going till you get to Vancouver. You will find an admirable and a world-renowned case of racial diversity and peace and respect for differences. The fact that he can come here and quote us criticizing ourselves for being a little bit prejudiced, seriously prejudiced, hopelessly prejudiced, yes, you can quote us. It's precisely that fastidious attitude to any sign of racism that marks the Canadian society. We won't put up with the kind of nonsense that's going on down in the States, which spawns racists who believe that there are irremediable differences between people, and that despite the fact that we can learn and we can modify our behavior, the case is hopeless. And how interesting that the case is hopeless with precisely the people who were badly abused, disgracefully abused for 250 years in America. How interesting that it is they that he fixes on as being irremediably bad. The shoe's on the other foot. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Professor March.
Well done.
Pleasure.
Very good.